The execution of long-running rules requires scheduling to avoid bogging down the data management system. A production-ready rule should implement 11 basic operations as described in Chapter 4.5.2 of the Policy Examples Workbook. The steps include verify all input parameters for existence of their type, create a log file to record all changes to files, track progress of the policy execution, initialize variables for the first execution of the rule, enable restart from the last successful operation, manage arbitrarily large data sets or numbers of files, manipulate query results in batches of 256 result sets, include new files added to system on restarts, generate statistics on the execution rate, minimize the load on the system through a deadline scheduler, minimize the number of sleep periods required by the deadline scheduler. A rule that implements all 11 production requirements can be restarted, tracks its own execution, monitors its execution rate, and logs its operations. Rules can also invoke operations related to virtualization of data collections. These capabilities are provided by the DataGrid middleware and enable rules to be run across multiple types of storage systems, operating systems, and network protocols. The virtualization mechanisms enable rules to retrieve persistent state information from the metadata catalog independently of the storage locations, differentiate between logical file name and the physical location of replicas, verify integrity of each file through checksums saved in the metadata catalog, update all replicas to the most recent version by keeping track of modified copies, identify missing replicas through queries on the metadata catalog and operations on the physical files at the storage locations, and create new replicas to replace missing replicas. This list of additional operations is targeted at integrity. A similar list could be made for rules related to authenticity, description, retention, disposition, distribution, and access controls. In each case, the information stored in the metadata catalog is used to check the properties of the data grid collections. An example production rule is shown here and is available at lifelibZone, home rwmoore rules rda-replication-rule.r. This is the most sophisticated rule we will examine this semester. This rule implements all 11 production basic operations while periodically checking that the required number of replicas are present and creating missing replicas. The rule updates the replicas to the most recent version, verifies the checksums on each replica, distributes new replicas across the storage vault, checks that there are enough storage vaults to create replicas at distinct locations, implements a just-in-time scheduler to slow down the processing rate to complete tasks at a specified deadline, manages information about which files have been processed as an attribute on the collection, adds new files to the list to process, and keeps a log file of all actions. The rule uses 4 input parameters. Star call is the collection that will be processed. Star delt is the number of seconds in the future when the rule should complete. Star num replicas is the required number of replicas, and star res is the storage resource where the log file will be written. The rule uses multiple policy functions to check input, create the log file, manipulate metadata, select a storage resource, and create replicas. These include check input collection name with check call input, check input resource name with check resource input, create a log file with create log file, check a metadata attribute on a collection, check meta exists call, get the number of files and size of a collection, get num size call, get a list of storage resources used by a collection, get resource call, verify the checksum on a replica, verify replica checksum, select a storage resource to use for a replica, select resource update, create replicas, update a metadata attribute on a collection, update call meta. On the rule displayed here, we check the collection input, check the resource input, and then do a delayed execution with the execution frequency of 7 days to actually go out and verify replicas, verify checksums, and replace missing replicas. This gets the current system time, initializes variables, creates the log file, checks whether or not a test data ID attribute has been set on the collection. If this attribute has been set, then you know that this is a restart. If the attribute doesn't exist, then this is the first time the rule is being run. It gets the number and size of the collection, calculates the expected execution time, assuming a 50 megabyte per second access rate to disk, writes out these parameters. Then it verifies that there are files to be done and there's a time limit in the future for which the processing must be completed, calculates the expected execution rate, identifies the resources that were used by the collection, verifies that the required number of replicas is less than or equal to the number of available resources. A query is made to retrieve the file names, file size, collection name, data checksum, data ID. This is an ordered list. It loops over the list, finds a file that it will use as the source for replicas, verifies the checksum on that file, verifies a resource that it will use as the source for making replicas, updates all the replicas to the most recent version, checks whether the number of replicas that are actually out there is less than or equal to the required number. If it is not the required number, it creates the missing replicas. It then analyzes whether or not it needs to slow down the execution rate to meet the required deadline. It checks that the amount of time it's going to sleep is greater than at least 4 seconds to avoid multiple very small intervals of stoppage. It updates the test data ID metadata value to the most recent set of files that have been analyzed, writes out statistics, resets the test data ID attribute back to 0 such that the next time it runs it will restart from the beginning, and then writes out usage statistics. Take 7 minutes and complete exercise 117. Examine the production operations and select the set your collaboration should enforce. See Chapter 4 of the Policy Examples Workbook. Please load a paragraph describing your result into the Lifetime Library in the subcollection class INLS 624 by the end of today's class.